This episode is brought to you by Progressive.
Are you driving your car or doing the laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity, like Progressive home and auto policies. They're best when bundled too.
Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save over $775 on average.
Quote a home and car bundle today at progressive.com.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $779 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Welcome to the Intro Zone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. We are your hosts, Mark Kashman and Chris McNulty. I'm Mark Kashman, Senior Product Manager on the SharePoint team here at Microsoft.
And I'm Chris McNulty, also a Senior Product Manager on the SharePoint team.
This show takes you inside and outside of SharePoint. You'll hear from experts behind the scenes and out in the field. It's all about how SharePoint fits into your everyday work life, with the goal being to share and manage content, knowledge, and applications in order to empower teamwork throughout your organization.
And today we have two very special guests, Matt Wade and Laura Rogers. We'll be chatting with them in our guest segments later on in the show.
For our first segment, news and announcements, let's talk about what's currently rolling into Office 365. We've seen a couple of things roll in from a web parts perspective, the ability to do more rich text editing, putting tables into a text box. And obviously, once you've uploaded your image, to be able to edit the image there in line after you've uploaded it.
So where you don't have to bring it down to the desktop, bring up Photoshop and all that. That's great.
Nope.
I love that.
This is like Photoshop LE. You can do some of the basics, but right after you upload the video or the image, then you can edit it, crop it, set it to a right ratio and all that good stuff.
Well, that'll work for me because most of my image work is quite basic.
That's very good. Well, we're tailoring and targeting you as the end user, Chris. So now imagine you've got a nice looking piece of content. You've created a page. You've created a news article. One of the new things that's rolling out now is also the ability to more easily promote that. So if you wanted to send it an email, copy a link, those are easy things. But now you can do things like add a page to the top navigation. Or you can promote something that was started as a page to then something that becomes news, which, if you create something that was a page, you turn it into news, it really goes into the news service. It shows up on the SharePoint home. It goes into your mobile app.
That's great because, one thing I've observed talking to users is everyone has a different learning style. And some people's eyes naturally gravitate to the top of the page, or some people want to drill in and just give me a feed. I think it's great that we're doing that.
Yep. And a couple things for admins. Obviously, one of the big ones, if you talk to pretty much any admin that's focusing on Office 365 or SharePoint in the cloud, is the SharePoint Online Admin Center. The SharePoint Admin Center is getting a pretty serious facelift.
We're doing more than changing the logo out, though. I think people are really going to be happy to see us moving forward. We've modernized so much of SharePoint in the last 2 years, and we haven't forgotten about you admins. More goodness is coming.
Yeah, tons of goodness. Lots of things they'll be able to do and even just see that they haven't been able to see as far as visibility on all types of sites.
Right.
The last thing that I had noted here was the concept around creating custom site designs. So it's not just an admin type experience. It's really a site owner that wants something to look the way that they want to look, but then every time a site gets created, they want it to follow this sort of method or programmatic approach.
Right.
What else is rolling out soon?
So two other things that we think are really important. We know that with all of the modern portals and pages and things that we've been rolling out, there's still, you might realize this, there's still a lot of people who use SharePoint to store files. Had you known this?
Files and something like lists. I think people talk about those a lot.
Two core values that we've really been focusing on for document libraries. First and foremost, being able to move a file. And so the magic of this is being able to take all that metadata and all the versions across all those dimensions. And when I say that I have a file in one place and I want to move it to another, it'll just move it for you without having to copy it down, upload it somewhere else, delete it, manually update the things. So what's great about this is you may have a file that begins in OneDrive, and you and I have passed it back and forth. It's time now to get it to our team site so that more people can collaborate on it with us. This is just a one-click way of making sure that you're doing that.
I think it's a great feature, and I think it also complements just the generic approach that people take of thinking of SharePoint as a content management service.
Right.
This really does allow them to do a lot of how they move their files, how it lands intact, and
Right.
where it lands, maybe it has a whole set of other rules and access permissions. So I've heard a lot of great things in the feedback. I think you're driving, our go-to-market and messaging. I think it's been well received pretty recently.
Well, the other thing about it that we've gotten some feedback on is how it relates to migrations. Now, it is absolutely not the tool. If you have 10 years worth of on-premises data that you want to move to Office 365, this is not the tool for you. But in many ways, the last 10 years plus have really been about agile software development, about just-in-time projects and iterative delivery. And, we've absorbed that at the product. Migration projects still, you see a lot of people sort of staring closely at specifications and planning for too many years. Because what if I get a document, quote, in the wrong place? Mm-hmm. And I'm not arguing for inaccuracy, but you put a document somewhere, you discover a month later, it really belonged in the HR site, not the finance site. No big. Mm-hmm. There's a direct way to keep that going.
Just move it, but not lose a lot of information.
Right.
So what can you tell us about what's rolling out now around bulk editing?
So bulk editing is something I really love. When I'm grabbing a bunch of documents to upload them at one time, or if I'm looking at my library and I see I have data that I want to update. Say we're working on hypothetically, say, a podcast, and we think that we want to reschedule it, and we have event date as one of the fields that's in there. Rather than have to go into each separate piece, now I can just highlight those 6 documents, those 10 documents, whatever, hit the information pane, and it opens up a bulk edit view. I can just apply the date once, and it's automatically going to propagate to all the documents I select it needs to go to.
So you're telling me in SharePoint now I can multi-select and then multi-update across metadata and, of course, other actions.
That is exactly what I'm telling you.
That's amazing. Well,
Isn't it?
It really is amazing because we see a lot of people think in terms of, I have to do that 10 times. And certainly that they can do it, and there's huge value once it's done in terms of discoverability and manageability and all that stuff of the content itself. But, of course, to save them time, that's a huge user advantage.
You're looking at a document library, and it's already been populated, and you decide, I want to add information, the event name, the episode name. Mm-hmm. You already have 100 documents, and the result is no one's going to individually edit 100 documents. There's all tricks that people can do to download some stuff to Excel and play with it and write a script. But we really want to talk to people who live in SharePoint who, aren't embodied with godlike administrative powers and skills in .NET development. Just being able to do that in line, that's something everyone should be able to do.
So let's switch over, moving from news and announcements to talk about our topic of the week. And this week, certainly with the focus on the end user experience, I wanted to talk to you, certainly to hear your take on it. I might ask you to put on your consultant hat, maybe sometimes your marketing hat, maybe sometimes just your normal Chris hat. I haven't seen that hat yet. But I wanted to talk about, from an end-user perspective, building blocks of the intranet. There's a lot of things that we offer through this giant toolkit we call Office 365. And however people are coming to that, whether they're advocating for it or it's something that their company has provided to them, there's a lot of moving parts and pieces. And there's a lot, certainly, that we own. So centering on that a little bit, these various building blocks of the intranet. I'm going to list out a few, and then I've got a couple teaser questions to get us started here. But if you think about sites, people can create lots of different types of sites, collaborative type sites, communication type sites, and coming soon, what we talk about in terms of collections of sites, something like the hub sites. But then beyond the site itself, you've got pages, lists, libraries, web parts, bringing in information that may not necessarily live in SharePoint, and then those end tools, the ones that I think of are the SharePoint Home and the SharePoint app. How should an end user think about these building blocks? How are we not only promoting it, but really seeing people use it?
Yeah, I really like to take a grassroots approach to thinking about that because, obviously, I think that team sites have, for a long time, been that building block at the centerpiece of document-centric collaboration. What I was really excited about with communication sites and discovered that my excitement was not unique when we saw it over the past year is that communication sites logically provide this higher level way of thinking about information when I want to reach a broader audience. I mean, jumping back to if you've been working with SharePoint for a while, you're used to that, I don't want to say legacy, but it's very much a well-established tradition of building out an information architecture and saying, I'm going to set up a site collection and then I'm going to drill into a bunch of subsites so I have a hierarchy that's being structured. And when we think about Office 365, we have groups being used to set up lots of experiences across the suite. So I can have a SharePoint team site tied to a group, and I can have a planner and a Microsoft Teams experience, all empowered by the group. But SharePoint does sort of get to that mental map that in the same way that we were talking about earlier. Some people look at parts of, their eye naturally goes to the top of the page. Some people go to search. Some people scroll all the way down to the bottom to see what's newer and where the activity feed is. I think the same thing is true. There are some people who start at the bottom, at the team site, and naturally then they want to put their experience there into a larger context, which is the communication site. Other people want to begin at the top. And it's really important to understand for adoption that users have different learning styles. So it's not a matter of choosing one. You do need to empower both. But some people naturally need to start at SP Home. Sorry, I'm using our vernacular for this. But
SharePoint Home in Office 365.
The SharePoint Home experience in Office 365, brought to you by Microsoft. But people naturally start there. What's new? What's current? You've got the little, I still like to call it mini delve, which is the feed that sits on each site card to give me a reminder of what's going on that I might want to pay attention to. And from there to drill into those more permanent, I keep saying mileposts because we're in the U.S. And I keep describing the mileposts of information architecture.
You mean kilometer posts?
Kilometer posts. And that's something that, that being able, some people come from the top down, some people come from the bottom up, but also looking kind of across horizontally, understanding that other tools that are building blocks of the intranet aren't just the site structures and the information in those sites, but being able to bring information in from a system like Planner, from a connected framework like Yammer. I think those are other parts of that palette that we need to make sure stay considered.
I agree. The other thing I thought would just be interesting to kind of put in a context is maybe how we're getting started with this podcast. You and I, and a few other folks that are helping us on the back end or providing us sort of suggestions for the next episode or whatnot. So we created a team site. And we don't yet have an asset to then communicate out. We know where we're going to put it, is our communication site. And I will tell you, from who's created those things, I created the team site. It created in a couple seconds. We had a shared notebook. I put in my initial notes. You added to that. And then we were able to share that out to a few people. Alongside that is then the notion of once these podcasts become available, we'll do a lot of public announcement, a lot of, kind of pushing it out there. But we also then want to share it with everybody who has interest of SharePoint, wants to learn more, maybe wants to share a link to a podcast to their customer. And that's where we're going to then start to promote on our communication site.
Right.
And hopefully once we start to get that machine cranking, I will tell you almost all of that is at the fingertips of you and I. I didn't have to go approach our IT department. We work with them a lot from a conferences perspective to work with them. But on the whole, I'm just a normal end user who was able to get my work done.
Right.
The use case was we needed to collaborate, you and I. We needed to make sure other people had visibility on that. And those are a couple of nice blocks inside our intranet.
Let's go through what's going to happen. I mean, once this thing is ready, we want to promote this to the world. We also need to promote this internally on our intranet, which... Should I reveal our dirty secret, or what we call our intranet?
Absolutely. I think let me get a bowl of rice ready.
Yeah, because we call it SOI, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Yammer. So on our SOI site, we have a list that keeps track of collateral we want to share with our field, and this is going to go into a list. And we're going to tag this with a column that's talking about content services because we've been talking about that. We'll tag it with team sites so we can make sure as people are looking for different topic areas internally, they're looking for roadmap. They're looking for more information. They're looking for white papers. And some people want to go by topic. Some people want to say, just show me all of the podcasts that we have. Being able to slice and dice it that way.
And I think the thing that you brought up just at the tail end is how you slice and dice it is also then appropriate for what we've been talking about is creating the content. Mm-hmm. But the other aspect, which I think is a huge part of the overall intranet experience, is the consumption.
Right.
So somebody creates a list, now I have a view on that list. Somebody puts a document out there, it's not hard to find. If somebody publishes news, it's going to come to me on the SharePoint home experience or through my SharePoint app. And so there's a lot of areas, obviously, of the intranet. And there's a lot of things that SharePoint supports way beyond what we've been talking about. But from that context of an end user, whether they're creating the content or consuming it, whether it's collaborative or broad communication, that's what we're trying to get across. That end user experience, not only, yes, we check those boxes, but we really focus on those being great first-run, first-time experiences. And of course, the more you use it, the more comfortable you get. Here's how to create a news article. Here are the web parts available to me. Here's how it works. That's hurdle 1. Hurdle 2 is now when I publish it, I should have great awareness that there's going to be a lot of things that the service does for me.
Right.
That it gets me to that end user. And if that common balance of 30% people create content, 70% consume it, there's a huge focus on the consumption, the actual SharePoint user experience.
But it also gets back to, I think, thinking from a design perspective about persistence and memory. Being able to understand that, you take something like this podcast and distribute an email to people saying, here it is, and there will be a post in Yammer and so on and so forth. And people look at those things as links, but I like to think of them as atomic. It's really hard to have a mental map of every link you've ever been sent or something you want to go take a look at. It is a little easier as a moniker to remember, it's on the soy site. I remember where the soy site is, so wherever I need to go, I just need to remember that and I can get there from there. It's that ability to aggregate information and start to contextualize it. That's really one of the major powers of team sites. And in particular, I know this has been your pride and joy over the past couple of years, like what we've been able to do with modern pages and being able to bring more and more things in and make it simpler to plug things in. If you're listening to this and you're wondering and you've never built a page, this is designed to be something that anyone can do, to be able to build a page and add information to it. Pages and team sites, the most essential building block of the intranet. And the magic at the top level of SP Home, which those of you listening know now is the SharePoint homepage experience in Office 365, brought to you by
Microsoft, of course.
The point there is that tends to be organically driven through machine learning. So there's tooling that you don't need to go everywhere to update everything. Applying it down there, make sure that people who are those top-down discoverers and top-down finders of information are also going to get that served to them free.
I think that's the most important part, mostly just to know what's happening.
Right.
Not only do we have your back and you can create, and where you store it, it's going to be secure, it's easy to share, all that stuff. But the reality is anybody ever going to see it?
Yep.
I'm spending time on getting my information out there. Is it easy for them to get? And are they showing up?
Yep.
And so to have some of those built-in artificial intelligence or helpers behind the scenes that are helping to promote you, to promote your content, to get eyeballs, and certainly if they aren't, to be able to help you course correct or make more noise. You maybe need to just make more noise, and then people will find your content. Asking you to kind of put your consultant hat / marketing hat on is take a step back, and when people come to you or ask us, and certainly how our MVPs might pitch this and position it, when they're asked, I'm thinking about modernizing this experience. I'm thinking about moving my company into more of a new digital workspace, or whatever the kind of the mantra is that is set as their new broader CIO top-down approach of modernizing their intranet. What's your, kind of a couple sentences / approach to say, here's where to start, here's how to think about it?
So I think you need to break down barriers. And the two ways I'd say you have to think about breaking down barriers. First is that traditional hierarchy. If you think about the way that people work today, we tend to work in lots of teams. The days of I work in one department with the same 20 people, we file in at 9 o'clock to one room with cubicles and stay there and go home is not the way that people work. We have lots of different groups and constituencies and teams. Some of them are more permanent than others. Some of them may only last for, a couple of weeks or a couple of days. And sometimes they're business-oriented, sometimes they're personally oriented, sometimes they're sort of a hybrid of those. That's reality. And I think people are increasingly comfortable in that, wonderful digital world with all of these things and different information coming in to us simultaneously. We've learned to operate in that very dynamic, not highly focused, but highly distributed world. So taking an architecture that was built for like the mid to late 1980s about we're going to start with what continent you're on. Mm-hmm. Then we're going to ask you to drill into your country and then your state. Then you can find your office. Then you find your department. Then you keep drilling down. You're putting all sorts of artificial barriers to it. So breaking down barriers from a hierarchy perspective is really important. The second one is the individual barrier, the barrier to entry. Building a page now in SharePoint is not hard. You and I both have been looking at some other web page editing technology that shall be nameless, and it's really powerful and sophisticated, but it's not something that you just sit down and in 5 minutes say, hey, I built that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we first started to make these changes, with kind of the early days of what is now our modern intranet, but certainly we've built upon it in significant ways. I remember the demo that I gave was, watch how easy it is to put an image on this page. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to put it into a document library, grab the URL, go into edit mode and 10 steps. Right. Now it is, I just upload it. Some stuff happens on the back end that optimizes the image for the user. Right. I can crop it if I need to. I can, make it header. I can drag and drop it around the page into different zones. So I agree with you. Yep. I also remember some of those really simple actions were really significant wins because I tell you, a lot of people those times abandon even using images in SharePoint because it was so challenging, and now they don't have to. So I think we have a lot in terms to offer different building blocks, how people get started, where they go, and of course, once they've started, that there's headroom always to add more and to basically adopt dynamically the directions that the business goes. So the intranet is not something that gets left behind, but is actually something that they can lead with. Mm-hmm. So the building blocks are certainly meant to continue to be built with and built upon. So let's move into our first guest. We're going to be talking with Matt Wade. You may know him from icansharepoint. And I think a lot of people know about some of the infographics that he's been doing, something like the periodic table of Office 365. That's nice and interactive these days. Matt and I have come across each other both kind of in person and through the interwebs out there on Twitter, sometimes in the retweet of agreement, or certainly sometimes just that conversation that comes about when somebody posts something that's of interest. And certainly a lot of what Matt is doing has caught my eye personally, and I know from Microsoft side of things, just seeing what Matt is working on, it's been a real pleasure to see somebody who's active in the community, who's contributing back, but is also challenging in a very positive way. And I mean that in to say that he's highlighting things that sometimes aren't clear, we could make clearer, or areas of the product that maybe people weren't aware of, and how to come across that, really to help the end user. So Matt, thank you for joining us today, and certainly thanks for all the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be on, and I'll say that's the nicest way anybody could describe the annoyances that I when I poke at you guys.
I don't think I see that way. I see it as feedback, and I don't mean that in any way but positive, because sometimes you can't see everything, and sometimes you might see something a little bit differently, and it takes somebody giving a little bit of perspective to, okay, you know what? Okay, I get it. It's not that clear, or he's right. Or sometimes it just opens up a really good discussion, and I'm always open to that. So we really wanted to have you on. We've got this big focus of talking about user adoption, the user experience, and certainly I know from our end, we're trying to make the product and the service and, of course, a lot of the scenarios. But we wanted to get your take on how productivity is evolving and certainly the importance to the end user. I know you fell into SharePoint as a power user. And so I really wanted to start and just hear what were your early days with SharePoint, which I think helps scope sort of where you've taken it from there.
So, yeah, I'm an engineer by training. I have two very expensive pieces of paper that prove that, if anybody ever asks me. But I fell into IT sort of by mistake. And the SharePoint thing kind of came to me the first 3 years of my career. I was working as a mechanical engineer doing nuclear reactor design for the U.S. Navy.
Cool.
And our intranet was being basically sunsetted and replaced by SharePoint 2007. This was back in early 2010, I think it was. And so we had to replace our local user, our group site. So essentially, we were one team that happened to design certain aspects of next-gen reactors coming out. And we had a ton of documents on that site. It was built in Dreamweaver. I have no idea how to use Dreamweaver, but when I took over management of that site, I just kind of made changes as I needed to, added a couple links. I could do, some simple HTML if I needed to, but we had to replace that completely, which I will say nobody likes it that way, to have you pull the carpet out from under you, but that is the best way to get adoption to SharePoint, is tell you that you have to use it and there's no other, option, being a bit of a status, I guess, in that one. But when SharePoint 2007 came out, I started playing around with organizing all of our files. Well, our files date back to when my grandparents were working. That's how old the program is. So we had design documents, work scopes, drawings, a whole bunch of analyses, just a lot of engineering documentation that we needed to have organized.
And would you say by governance or by requirement those were kept around, or nobody wanted to delete anything?
No, they were formally published for government records. So we had to keep those files, and we also used them as the basis of our next design. So we need to have all that stuff really accessible to us. And the fact that metadata was there, okay, what component type, what project, what decade, what classification level? And that was an amazing way for me to organize stuff, create views, and it helped all of us. And we were about 15-person group, but within about 3 years, we tripled in size because we had new work coming. So all these new people needed a way to have a central place to find stuff. So it worked out great. And our central IT department asked if I'd help with doing the adoption stuff. So I built an internal central SharePoint help site, and that is by far the most useful or impactful thing I think that every organization needs to consider, is to have that internal help site that everybody can go to. You have, sort of the best use cases for that organization spelled out. This is the way we do things. And if you have questions, your discussion board, you can have, user interactions. We were a little different because we had very little external internet access. So I was the main source of information. So I'd have to go Google something on a public node, come back, and then put it on the internal network because we didn't have access. I did that for 3 years and oversaw a migration of SharePoint 2013 to Office 365, and we launched that in summer of 2016.
I think where you started from, what you just explained, was the right place. People maybe weren't aware of SharePoint, didn't know what it did, and they just need a little push in the right direction. And I'm curious also, as you went through the different upgrades, did you, from kind of being the forefront person that was doing a lot of the work, and then, of course, a lot of the training and awareness, did you see each upgrade as an opportunity not only to move to something that's the latest, greatest, but also as an opportunity to do things a little bit differently, or to take on, another thing that SharePoint can help with?
I think the features that come with all of the upgrades on-prem were the biggest selling point because, well, you probably work with a lot of engineers, actually, and you can probably relate to the fact that engineers can be very demanding. They know a lot. They always assume that they can do everything, which is not always true. I can attest to that from that experience, but they're always asking for more. So when new features came out with 2013, a lot of people were really pumped about it because, oh, great, now I can use this as an app because, engineers are the type of people that if you have a problem, they're just going to open up Excel and calculate the answer for you.
Right.
No matter if the answer is incalculable, they're still going to open up Excel. SharePoint offers a nice complement to that. So that was an easy way to get people to buy into it because it wasn't just a content management solution. It was actually an application source, and there were a lot of sort of local citizen developer type apps that were being built that people got excited with when new stuff came out.
Yeah. So, now you've jumped into the Office 365 fray. There's a lot more that's accessible to them and a lot more that end users will be able to do and take advantage of. But when you think about that, now that there's this general access, obviously broader access, more and more people with the service growing, obviously more people have access to this. There's still a learning curve beyond just a single customer. When you talk to more than just a single customer, as you think about across all of them, what do you think are the most important lessons to not just the IT department, but the users of Office 365?
So I think the ability to use the apps is sort of fundamental to today's workforce. It's, I would say it's almost kind of analogous, although I'm being a little extreme here, but it's almost analogous to being able to read. You can't do a knowledge worker job well if you can't read. And I really do believe that you really can't do as well as you think you could if you don't have an understanding of how to collaborate, how to communicate, how to access and share your stuff, at least with the basic tools. So if you're all in the same, providing some training on these basic tools, so, how to share, how to co-author, how we want to communicate. If you haven't agreed on that yet, you're not all on the same page, and the way that things are getting done is going to be inefficient. It may not be 40% of the efficiency you could otherwise gain. It might be closer to like 75 or 80, and some orgs may be 98%, but there's still a gap there that can be filled, and I really do think that understanding these applications and having a good grasp on how to use them and apply them is really fundamental these days.
And so is that where you feel most organizations struggle? And I think one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is specific to the SharePoint user experience, where you see people struggling. But if there's sort of that step back in just generally how people can work together and leverage the technology outside of a specific product or service, is that where you see the bigger struggle?
I do. So I think agreeing on how they're going to use SharePoint or 365 app X, fill in the blank, is what's key. So it's not just a SharePoint thing, but I look at it as, how many team retreats occur when you talk about these big picture and philosophical ideas that don't really get you that much. So I'm really big on pushing the concept of trade in your trust falls for discussing precisely how everyone will agree to communicate, share files, edit files, get them reviewed, get them shared out. This business process is rarely well-defined, and it's one that really should be.
Yeah, in the space that I focus on a lot around portals, just building the portal and expecting everybody to just show up certainly is not a great approach. And certainly, I think most people that build out portals do the planning and strategy, but then they also have to plan the rollout and the training. I wholeheartedly agree with you, not just on that specific workload, but certainly, you can't just assume that, like you said, a trust fall will just be there to catch them. So it leads me into where I wanted to get your take on, from a conversation, the options that are available to an end user and certainly to a team, and maybe even from the different scenarios of across the whole organization. But you have groups, teams, Yammer, email. I'd love to see how you tackle that one and what's your take on it.
So I think that Office 365 groups is probably one of the most powerful collaboration, I can't use the word tool because it's not a tool, but experiences that's out there, because the barrier of entry is now so low. I don't have to have somebody sit in a 1 hour long SharePoint training session to understand how to use the tool. It really does just kind of work, which is great. But I actually do a session on this topic at the user level. And when I present these at conferences, I actually present a session that those people in the audience can take back to their companies with them and basically throw their own branding on it and give the exact same presentation. So I've sort of done the work for them. Mm-hmm. And my biggest sort of takeaway for everybody on this is that which app you use in a situation for groups always boils down to just one question. And it comes down to, how do you want to communicate? Because when you choose how to communicate with groups, at least right now, you're sort of sticking your feet into wet cement. And you're going to be committed to how you do that, because if you start with Yammer and decide that you don't like, the feed sort of communication style, all of your files, your planner, all those apps that come with that group, they're not going to move over to email if you guys decide to use email instead, or to Teams. Teams and Outlook, yeah, they do offer some interchangeability there, which is good. You can still keep the underlying content in the same place. So my big thing is always, how do you want to communicate? Make that decision first and then go from there.
Yeah, I certainly, that whole concept you just said around having cement or lead boots, certainly we don't want people to drag down to the bottom of any reservoir with anybody named Tony. But I do like the concept of, having awareness of what each does, and certainly different teams will work differently. I like how you frame it. I certainly agree with you. It's not just a tool. It's a lot of options, and knowing what those options are sort of challenge one, and then making it a great experience across different applications and different use cases is certainly something that we are always trying to improve, with a big ear open to feedback, of which, we get a lot from you. That's why we're interested to talk to you. If you look at it from a feature perspective of what's been disclosed recently, what would be the 3 features you think are going to be the most impactful that kind of grow or add upon where you see things today?
So I think the first one for me is, and these are all sort of micro things, that the sum of the parts equals a very big, impactful change for me, is that all of the incremental improvements to SharePoint's collaborative interface, both in SharePoint itself and in Teams, have been really, really great. And I look forward to more of those coming out. And I might get one minor change in the user interface on a Wednesday morning, and I might get a slightly bigger one next Thursday and another small one on Tuesday. But the fact that it's always self-improving is really useful for me, because I can point out to my clients, to my users, hey, this new thing is available, use it or don't, but here's how you could use it, and here's how it could really, impact or make your day better. The second one for me is the new search experience looks really, really slick. Now, I haven't played with it yet. I don't think I can at this point, but I'm really hoping to retain the advanced options that we already have, because I really do think that SharePoint search is great.
When you're searching in an app, across various apps, you're going to get a consistent experience thanks to the Microsoft Graph, and that you don't see it yet. You could get a little cheat view today if you go to Delve and do a search in Delve. That's the direction that they're going. But it just from an inside perspective, I will tell you, the teams are working very closely together so that the result set is very much similar, but in context from where you're searching from.
And then the third one, I guess, so I'll bite on hub sites. I think you guys have done a really good job on the concept of hub sites, the execution of them. I'm looking forward to getting some to start playing with them. That said, I will say, because of the flat architecture sort of being the default now, which I agree with, I think flat architecture is smarter. I think it always has been. Mm-hmm. It just didn't really have a technical reason to say why, and now groups makes it sort of forced. I think the hub sites came a little later than they should. We have needed some sort of, cross-site collection navigation for a while, and it's great that it's coming, but I would have loved it, a year ago.
A little earlier. Yeah, good feedback. If you had a piece of advice to Microsoft, and this could be to marketing, to engineering, to just the company on the whole in this space that you focus on, but maybe specific about SharePoint or Office 365, what would that advice be?
So you asked for one. I'll give you two. The first one,
I'll take two.
The first one is a bit of a gripe, and it's I need clarification on what all the search boxes do. I feel like there's seemingly hundreds of them, and I just don't know what they all do. I will say I brought that up to Jeff Tieper at an event in New York City, and he said that he rounded up a new sort of search team to go off and unify or consistentify, or make some consistency across the search experience, which would be a very welcome change, because my users are always asking me, what does this box search? And I'm never quite sure, because each app has its own search box, and even in SharePoint, your search boxes sometimes bounce around. Sometimes it's just only that library, that kind of stuff. So I've actually considered making an infographic just for the search boxes, and then I realized that it would be too big, number one, and I wouldn't be able to keep it up, constant, because things change, frequently enough.
Well, I think you've got one that could grow off of that. I think your how to search in SharePoint, if it got that interactive treatment that you did with the periodic table, maybe there's room and a space to grow. At the same time, hopefully there's less for you to have to call out as a clarifier.
That's true. Yeah, we shall see.
They did have a really great summit in Oslo. So Jeff Tieper and his team do take that seriously. And I know they had a lot of great go-dos or actions coming out of that meeting.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I give him a lot of credit. That was one of those user group sessions, and it was in Manhattan. There were a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and he was very, very transparent and open. And his response to that one, because that was my big one, was, nope, I'm with you. We're working on it, and we'll get back to you. And I think that that's a good thing.
Great.
So the second one, which is sort of the bigger one, when I give presentations on SharePoint, Office 365, groups, things like that, I have a very hard time these days using my vernacular English. I need to ask you guys to stop stealing our vernacular words. Mm-hmm. So words like teams, flow, forms, groups. Bring back the days of brands like Excel, SharePoint. Take a lesson from acquisitions like Yammer and Skype. Go for, be a little wild. Go for some words that, or phrasing or branding, like, I don't know how involved the marketing team is with the engineering team, and I totally get how you're going to have, a good debate probably over that process. But, then again, I'm liking this new Kaizawa thing for just that reason. I think it's only available in Japan right now, but that word, cool, that's great. Once I understand what it is, and you haven't stolen a word from me. So I actually have to have a glossary slide in all of my presentations to explain that if I capitalize the word, that means something. If I didn't, and this is specific to that, and Outlook groups versus Office 365 groups, and just the word group and team. I can't use those anymore. And I'm not quite sure what word to use to represent. I actually sort of facetiously say, that collection of people in a room together when you close the door. That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
As more apps come out, which I'm sure they will, just tossing a dash of creativity on the brand name.
Fair feedback. I get the concept around branding versus something descriptive. And I know one little cheat that I use, but I'm not trying to get myself out of a corner, is the use of capital T or lowercase t. Matt, certainly, I want to thank you for your time. I more want to just thank you for what you're doing out there. It's very interesting to see how people put a spin on trying to make sense and make things that can land with the user so that they aren't scared and approaching something that's new, or as they're using something and something new comes out, that they can just try it and not feel that it's going to get them in any trouble. And so I think you shine a really nice light on making things a lot more accessible. And I mean that from just an understanding what does it do. So I thank you for that, but certainly thank you for your time today. I loved what you said, and I'll certainly reflect on it, make sure the team hears it, and now through the podcast, the world gets to hear it.
Well, I appreciate that too.
Thank you for sharing everything. One thing that we do just a little bit towards the end of the show is an FAQ of the week. So I hope you'll stay with us and share your FAQ of the week, something that you've heard repeatedly this week, and we'd love to hear how you've answered that.
Sure, sounds great.
Okay, as a quick note, if you don't know who Jeff Tieper is, he's a corporate vice president in charge of all of SharePoint, OneDrive, and Office development on the engineering team. We're going to move on to our next segment, which is the app or best practice of the week. The thing that I wanted to highlight to people is something that was just a great report, was done by our friend Sam Marshall and the Clearbox consulting team. And the report is called SharePoint Intranets in a Box 2018. So it's a pretty current look across all of the Intranet in the Box offerings, their term. Certainly, these are our solution providers that help people build out their intranets. And if you go to the report, at least the teaser of it, there's at least 34 companies that they articulate are making offerings in this. All of them offer sort of the upfront consulting, the build out of the pages, and certainly help deploy in different fashions. But a lot of them are ISVs, an internet service provider in providing products out of the box, which literally is an accelerator. Something that would have taken 8 months now takes a couple of weeks or months.
Right.
And of course, it's built on our latest greatest, which is even more of an accelerant because those are also pretty ready to go. Yep. So the thing I liked about the article was it really was a frank look at what all of these different intranets solution providers offer. And it's a pretty deep dive. A lot of great pictures to show you what the types of sites that they can help create, the approach that they take, the tie-in to Office 365 or SharePoint on premises. And I just thought the report was really frank and clear and very inclusive. There isn't a solution provider that you and I wouldn't note on there. Or there were a lot that maybe I wasn't aware of, and you know the depth of it. So it's not too hard to find. We'll put a link in our show notes. But again, it was one of the things I wanted to point out. It's called the SharePoint Intranets in a Box Report 2018 by Clearbox Consulting. And their lead there is a guy named Sam Marshall.
That sounds great. So the app of the week I want to really talk about in that context is Microsoft Forms, especially when you enhance it with Microsoft Flow. And that's something I think you're going to hear me return to this theme, in coming weeks and months. But if you haven't taken a look at it, it is a component of Microsoft Office 365 that lets me quickly build something to gather data from people who are in my organization as well as outside of my organization. And that's the one in particular I want to highlight. Lots of times we want to be able to send a quick survey like, hey, we're going to be doing a lunch and learn session for you coming up in Omaha next week. What would you like us to order for you for lunch, steak or extra steak? It is Omaha, after all. We're not actually going to Omaha. Sorry to get anyone's hopes up.
But I'll take a steak.
But being able to send that out anonymously and let people fill it out, you can distribute it via email or via websites or however you want to distribute that link. But when people fill it out, it's going to come back into the service. And being able to use Microsoft Flow to trigger other actions around that, like, sending me an email, or because I'm fussy, sending me a text message because it makes me feel good knowing that I sent this out into the world and people actually are responding back to me. And that's also important to be able to understand that I can personalize that experience, because some people like to be alerted when things are going on. Other people don't want to be interrupted and want to make time to go in and check on those things. And that is, I think, one of those things that is really important about digital transformation. We talk about this a lot at Microsoft as the world is changing. Therefore, we need to change the way we work. I tend to believe that changing the way that you work and I work is the way that the world gets changed. It starts with each of us.
So to build out your form, an end user would just go to forms.office.com.
Forms.office.com.
And now has integration with Microsoft Flow, so that same end user can go into the Flow canvas.
Right.
And then just real quick, how do they wire it up?
Once you've built the form and you have the link to it, send it out to people, they can fill it out. There's already a template on the Flow website saying, hey, I want to be alerted anytime someone fills out the form. Pick the template. It'll ask you to pick one or two things like, what's the form? And, confirm, what your email address is or your account for receiving the alert. And then it just runs.
All right. So very approachable for an end user. Okay.
Yes.
So let's move and talk about the SharePoint ecosystem. The community has always been great, and there's lots of great individuals. And certainly looking at it from an ecosystem perspective, the business of SharePoint wouldn't exist without the ecosystem. So we wanted to talk today with Laura Rogers, who is certainly from both the community and representative of the ecosystem. Laura is representative of IW Mentor. You might also have seen her on the SharePoint Power Hour webinar Nearest You. IW Mentor is an online training company that specializes in SharePoint and Power Apps with on-demand training that can be purchased via subscription or individual classes. But just taking a step back, I've been working with Laura for a long time. She's a great, great part of the community. Certainly a lot of people think of her as sort of your citizen developer, somebody who can help you with business solutions. And we've worked with her as a presenter at different events, certainly as an advocate always, and somebody that we go to ask questions. How is this going to land with the general community, or what of these 10 things should we prioritize? So it's always been great to hear from Laura, to see what she's doing, and obviously knowing how integral a part of she is with the community. So Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Mark. My company I keep it pretty simple. It's just it's online training modules that we have everything ranging from beginner, like absolute very beginner classes in SharePoint, just getting around in SharePoint, ranging all the way through power user. And then we have some pretty advanced things, which lately, like especially Power Apps, and we have even classes, teaching about workflows and different ways to do forms and logic in SharePoint.
As people consume your training, and either you get this direct feedback or it's what dictates what further training you're going to create, what are the most common adoption blockers that you're seeing that, of course, you unblock?
That's a great question. I think that in most cases, of course, it depends on with the level that the student is taking. But with the beginner classes, I believe that people need to have just that sort of security and understanding that they inherently understand how to get around in SharePoint and their site, and really that it's easy to understand. You don't really need to have training in SharePoint, especially lately, because Microsoft, you guys have made it just so super, everything's obvious and simple. And so people just get that sort of comfort of going through a class and realizing that, oh yeah, I can do this. This is easy. And then when it comes to the more advanced things like Power Apps, with as far as adoption blockers, I think that it helps. First of all, just a lot of just the main concepts of how to use Power Apps and how end users use Power Apps. But the people that take the class are usually the ones that are imparting the improved user adoption in their company when you get to be the more, the power user and the advanced people taking the class. So they then kind of, a lot of the times it gives them the confidence to say, oh, well, I'm not the only one whose end users feel this way or who's struggling through this. And so sometimes it's a just sense of community and with seeing a lot of familiar concepts and then being able to go forward and have the confidence to improve the user adoption in their own companies from what they learned as far as best practices from our classes.
I love that. So you're saying you're training the trainers.
I believe sometimes we are, because a lot of the people that take, for example, the power user classes, those are like site managers, and those are people who are maybe in charge of SharePoint for a small company, things like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I like how that scales, and I think that's really nice in terms of the value that they're actually getting. So kudos. That's really cool. So we all have metrics. We all track, obviously, what's getting consumed and what isn't. We do it certainly for the product. What are people clicking on? Are they, abandoning, certain use patterns? But for your training, what are you seeing? What of the training that you have available is the hottest training? What are people clamoring for?
Power Apps is absolutely the hottest right now. We just taught a Power Apps class this week, a 4-day class, and it filled up a couple of weeks ago with 30 people in the class, just a live online class, and it filled up. And after it filled up, we had 2 or 3 requests every single day for a couple of weeks of people could you just squeeze me in? I need to take this class. And so our minds were blown. So we went ahead and set up a March class, and we've already had a few people sign up for that. So it's pretty crazy. Power Apps is very hot right now.
Okay. So the Power Apps are hot, and obviously in person on the internet, obviously for more than just an hour. It's impressive that you're not only getting people that wanting to come in, but they're engaged and staying the whole time. I think that says a lot for the training itself.
Oh, yeah, it was a lot of fun because it's interactive. We have chat, we have Q&A, we have it's just one big discussion the whole time while I'm teaching it. And we all got to know each other. We all, shared ideas and tried different things. And yeah, it was a blast.
Cool. So thank you for sharing a little bit more about IW Mentor. My last question really speaks, hopefully, to all users and knowing that you're expert in this area as far as those special little checkboxes or you should try this. I want to ask, what is your quick user tip, if you would share the sort of the most important one or the most invaluable one?
The one that seemed to blow a lot of people's minds this week in the training that I think a lot of people don't realize is that in Power Apps, you can actually send an email directly from Power Apps without having to use a workflow or Microsoft Flow. So that's a big one.
All right. So email from Power Apps. Good tip. So thank you for sharing more about IW Mentor. Certainly on behalf of Microsoft and the SharePoint team, thank you for the work that you do to support users and, of course, the users of the users, the trainers. I love that. So what is the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing and certainly to keep up with IW Mentor?
You can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @WonderLaura, and IW Mentor is @IW That's IW for Information Worker, MENTOR. And then my personal blog is wonderlaura.com, and of course, IWmentor.com is our site.
Awesome. And I can attest that these are all very active places to go and certainly try out and get used to just taking a lot of training from IW Mentor. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Laura, and thank you for sticking around with us for the FAQ section a little bit later in the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Our next segment is FAQs of the week. We get a lot of questions coming in from people using the technology, from our customers, from our partners, and we want to take a moment here to share what are our most frequently asked questions this week and provide those answers. I'll kick it off here. The most common question I've been getting this week is people talking about hub sites. They're excited about hub sites. The question is, will it replace my main company portal? Is it the Uber thing? And we want to make sure of 2 things, really, as part of the answer. One is no, it's not designed to replace your company portal.
Right.
It's not a single point for everything. For smaller divisions or smaller groups or maybe even smaller companies, that's possible. But really, by design, the intent is to have multiple hub sites and really to distribute a hub site out to the team that has a lot of sites that they want to bring together. And then the benefit of having roll-up of news, consistent search across all those sites, consistent branding. So when people ask, will it replace my company portal? We want clarity around no. Hub sites are not the end-all, be-all company portal thing. But they certainly play into an aspect of another building block for people to be able to collect their sites together. And again, the intent to build multiple hub sites.
It's interesting. I've also heard a similar question about SharePoint Home. Is SharePoint Home my company portal? And the answer that I usually give is, it depends, because I spent years in consulting, but probably not. If you're a small company and you don't have a lot of resourcing to invest in building any kind of portal experience, it might be the place where people start their day. But probably most companies of any size or scale either need to build on top of those capabilities or build their own based on what their requirements are.
So that's my FAQ. Certainly, it's pretty centered around things I focus on. What's the most common thing you've heard this week, and what's your answer?
So literally, I've been asked this question 4 times this week. When will Power Apps come to on-premises SharePoint?
Great question.
And the answer is, if you remember the Palmolive ads, you're soaking in it. You already have it. Mm-hmm. Power Apps connect to SharePoint Online intrinsically, and through a free gateway service that we provide, it can connect back into your SharePoint 2013 and 2016 environments. Mm-hmm. So you need not feel left out of all the Power Apps goodness that Laura's been talking to you about. It's something that definitely comes to you on premises. And that's a question we hear over and over and over again. I can't say it enough. Just use the gateway. It's a really simple service.
Excellent.
And if you don't know what a gateway is or how to turn it on, you can tell your local friendly SharePoint administrator that Chris said, it's pretty easy to turn on. Could you do this for them, please? Thank you.
Good to hear. Since you went into the Power App zone, I think maybe we'll jump next to Laura. Laura, what is your most frequently asked question this week? And of course, we're more interested in hearing your answer to that question.
All right, Mark, my most frequently asked question, especially lately, is what is the difference when you're in a SharePoint form, a modern form, and you see the Power Apps menu in the list? What is the difference between create an app in the menu or customize forms? And create an app means you're creating a standalone Power App that can be seen in the list of apps in your mobile device, and it can be used on the mobile device or in tablet in a lot of different places. If you just click to customize forms, you're simply customizing the forms for that particular list in Power Apps, so that when end users go to that list and click New or click Edit, they're actually you're using the Power App as the front end to that list, but it is not going to be listed in your list of Power Apps for the organization or in the mobile Power App.
Cool. So the difference between taking over a form that already exists and creating an app almost from scratch, and just adding that clarity, that sounds like that's helped. That's great. That's awesome. So you basically are the gateway, Laura. That's awesome. You're the Power App gateway. So Matt, what's your frequently asked question this week?
I think the big one that's coming up right now is, do I stick with classic or do I go with modern? And it's a tough question because it's always going to be an it depends. But I am very much pushing folks in the direction of going towards modern if they're sort of starting from scratch. So if you're migrating from, say, an on-prem 2010, 2007 system, rebuild those pages in modern so that they're future-proof. And if you happen to be migrating or looking to change from classic to modern, it's not just going to be a transition. You're actually going to have to, recreate some stuff. And keep in mind that the full functionality of what you expect from classic sometimes isn't there yet in modern. I'm sure it will be. There are some web parts that I'm looking forward to seeing come out soon. But to do some research into the implications of going to modern, because some people just aren't ready yet, but some people were ready months ago.
I think that's a good answer, and I think you're right. It is a common question, and we certainly see it as an important one, where when people, if they need to stay classic, they can. It's not going away anytime soon. And certainly modern, we aim to make it better and better, and hopefully the proof is in every blog post, every event, every announcement to lean towards that way. Cool. Thank you for sharing your FAQ and, of course, your answer. Thank you, Matt and Laura. Those were great FAQs. We get a ton of questions, and we encourage people to always submit their questions, and we will certainly always aim to provide answers as best we can. So from an events perspective, certainly always look at where the next SharePoint Saturday event is, maybe coming to a city near you. One that I wanted to talk about was SPC North America. It's going to be in Vegas from May 21st to the 23rd, and it's going to be a big conference. It started off as a third-party conference. It really is a third-party conference, but we are supporting it in a significant way. Jeff Teeper is going to be there for the keynote, along with people like Dan Holm, Adam Harmitz, yourself, myself. About 50 to 80 people from a presentation presenting are going to be there with a whole host of our MVPs, workshops, sessions, ton of announcements. It's a real SharePoint conference.
And it's not going to be a cloud-only conference. There'll be plenty of goodness for those of you who are running SharePoint on premises as well, thanks to our colleague, the notable and esteemed Bill Baer. There'll be Yammer information.
Might find out a little bit more about SharePoint Server 2019.
You might,
maybe.
Rabbit. You might.
So definitely get your ticket, get registered for SPC NA in Vegas, May 21st to the 23rd. So, Chris, where should people go to keep track of what you're doing?
So one of the best places, especially from a content management perspective, to take a look at is our Content Services Resource Center. So it's aka.ms/SharePoint-Content Services, and we'll put that in the show notes for you if you need to follow up on that. But everything that we're doing from an event perspective, our white papers, our videos, our blogs, case studies, analyst reports, recipes, helpful hints.
Wow. One-stop shop. So where can people find you on Twitter? I know you're active on Twitter.
I'm at CMcNulty2000.
Excellent. So I am at Kashman, that's with a K, MKASHMAN. And certainly we both publish our various articles to the SharePoint community blog, and we'll share that link with you as well. Thank you to our guests, Matt Wade and Laura Rogers. Be sure to check out their sites to learn more about their expertise and offerings. Visit icansharepoint.com to learn more about Matt Wade, and visit iwmentor.com to learn more about Laura Rogers. Thanks for listening. This podcast aims to shine a light on the importance of the end user and how to make SharePoint and related apps more approachable. We at SharePoint want you to be able to unleash your creativity. Stay tuned for our next episode where we dive into successfully creating business solutions. And follow us on Facebook at MS SharePoint and on Twitter at SharePoint. Also, we encourage you to send in your comments and questions for our SharePoint team and guests on the show. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We're your hosts, Mark Kashman and Chris McNulty, and this has been the Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.